The bones did not stay buried, and that was the first thing they told Ronan Raven when he arrived. Not that people were missing, not that something had been seen in the fields, but that the graves would not remain closed, because every night the earth shifted, and every morning something was wrong. Not the soil, not the markers, but what lay beneath them. And when he reached the edge of the burial ground, he understood why the villagers had stopped going there entirely. The ground was uneven in a way that did not belong to weather or neglect the surface, broken in small places not large enough to collapse, but enough to show that something beneath had moved and moved often. And the smell that rose from it was not decay, not fresh rot, but something dry, something hollow like old bone left too long in the open. And he stepped forward slowly, his boots pressing into the disturbed soil, as his gaze moved across the rows of graves, counting them, measuring the spacing, because creatures that worked like this did not act without pattern, and what he saw was not random. Several graves had been opened, not from above, but from below. The dirt pushed outward from within, leaving narrow cracks where something had forced its way through, and then returned again, as if the ground itself had breathed and settled back into place. A faint sound reached him, then low and uneven, a soft clicking noise, followed by another and another like something tapping against itself beneath the earth, and Ronan's hand moved to the hilt of his blade as he crouched slightly, his fingers brushing the surface of one of the disturbed graves, and the soil shifted beneath his touch, not collapsing, not breaking, but moving just enough to confirm what he already knew. There was nothing stable beneath this place. Not anymore. The clicking came again, louder this time, closer, and the ground in front of him lifted slightly, a small, uneven rise forming before settling again. And then it moved to the side, the ripple traveling through the soil in a slow, controlled line, as if something beneath traced a path just below the surface. And Ronan stepped back, immediately creating distance, because standing over it when it chose to emerge would leave him no time to react. The ripple stopped then, and for a moment nothing happened, the silence returning heavy and still, as if whatever moved beneath had paused. And then the ground broke, the soil splitting open in a narrow, jagged line as something forced its way upward, not with speed, not with violence, but with deliberate pressure. And the first thing that emerged was not flesh, not skin, but bone. A hand stripped clean of everything that should have covered it, the fingers clawing through the dirt as it pulled itself free, followed by another, and then more shapes rising from the opening fragments of bodies, incomplete pieces that should not have moved on their own. And yet they did, the bones assembling as they surfaced, the joints locking into place with soft, clicking sounds, as if guided by something unseen. And Ronan did not hesitate. He stepped in his blade, cutting through the first form, before it could fully rise, the steel striking bone with a sharp crack as it split apart and fell back into the dirt. But even as it did more, followed the pieces continuing to emerge, forming into shapes that resembled bodies, but were not complete, not whole. The skeleton's uneven missing parts, compensating for it, by using what was available, ribs from one forming the frame for another, limbs mismatched but functional. And they moved toward him, not quickly, not in a rush, but in a steady, controlled advance that told him they were not acting on instinct. They were being directed. And Ronan stepped back again, his eyes narrowing as he tracked their movement. because this was not a single creature, not a single form. This was something that used the remains beneath the ground, assembling them into whatever shape it needed. And the realization settled quickly. This was not the source. This was what it created, the tools it used to move above ground while it remained hidden. Somewhere deeper, a larger shape shifted, then beneath the soil beyond the broken graves. The ground rising more noticeably this time as something heavier moved below, and the bones around him reacted instantly, their movement tightening, their formation aligning as if responding to a command. And Ronan exhaled slowly, because now he understood this was not random. This was controlled. Something beneath the earth gathered the bones of the dead and shaped them into something that could move, could hunt, could act, while it remained out of reach. And as the ground ahead began to split again, wider, this time, deeper, Ronan Raven tightened his grip on the blade, because whatever was coming next would not be fragments. It would be something whole, something built with purpose. And the real hunt had only just begun. The bones did not rush him after they rose, and that was what made it worse. Because anything that moved without urgency in a place like this did so because it did not need to hurry. The skeletons formed a loose circle around him, their steps uneven but coordinated, the joints clicking softly as they adjusted their balance. Mismatched limbs, compensating for missing pieces, as if something guided each movement from below. And Ronan did not strike first. He watched instead, his gaze moving from one to another, tracking the way they aligned, not randomly, but in response to something deeper, a pattern that ran through all of them at once, and that told him enough. They were not separate. They were extensions of a single will. Something beneath the ground controlled them, not with speed, but with precision. And the moment he understood that the formation tightened, not suddenly, but deliberately, the circle closing, by degrees the space around him shrinking, until there would be no room left to move without stepping into one of them. And Ronan stepped forward instead, breaking the line before it could complete his blade, cutting through the nearest one in a fast. Controlled arc, the steel striking bone with a sharp crack, the skeleton collapsing where it stood. But the others did not falter. They adjusted immediately, the gap closing as two more stepped into its place. Their movements faster now, more direct, as if the signal that guided them had shifted from positioning to attack. And the first strike came low, a broken set of jaws snapping upward toward his leg, while another reached for his arm from the side, and Ronan turned into the motion, his blade deflecting the first and splitting the second in a single follow-through. But even as the bones fell, they did not remain still, the pieces shifting slightly, as if trying to realign. And that was when he saw it, clearly. The fragments were not dead. They were waiting for direction, waiting to be used again, and that made it worse because cutting them down would not end it. It would only delay what came next. The ground behind them shifted, then a deeper movement that ran beneath several graves at once, the soil lifting in uneven waves as something larger moved through it, and the skeletons reacted instantly, their formation tightening again, their bodies angling toward that movement, as if preparing to receive something. And Ronan stepped back, half a pace, his stance lowering, because whatever controlled them was about to act directly. The earth split open, then wider than before, the soil breaking apart in a jagged line as a larger structure forced its way upward, bones rising in clusters rather than pieces. Entire sections of skeletons pulled together into a single mass, limbs locking into place, ribs forming a central frame, skulls fused into the upper section, in a rough, uneven shape that resembled a head, but not one that had ever been alive. And as it rose, the smaller skeletons shifted around it, their positions aligning in a pattern that made it clear. This was not just another construct. This was something more, something built to lead or to strike where the others could not. And Ronan did not wait for it to stabilize. He moved forward, immediately closing the distance before it could fully form his blade, driving into the lower section, where the bones had not yet locked completely, the steel splitting through the structure and breaking part of it away. But the mass did not collapse. It adjusted the remaining pieces, shifting into place, the gap closing as if the damage had been anticipated, and the creature responded with a sudden surge forward. Its movement, heavier than the others, but faster than its size, suggested its limbs striking in a wide arc, meant to force him back. And Ronan stepped inside the motion again, his blade cutting upward through the center. But the resistance was different here, stronger, denser, as if the bones had been reinforced by something beyond their natural strength, and he pulled back immediately before the mass could close around him, because now he understood this was not just a collection of parts. This was a structure designed to endure, to adapt to damage in real time, and the smaller skeletons pressed in again, behind it, their movements sharper now, more aggressive, as if the presence of the larger form had increased their coordination. And Ronan moved constantly, his blade cutting through them as they came, but the pressure built with each second, the space around him tightening, the ground uneven beneath his feet, as more of the surface shifted from below. And the realization settled deeper. This would not end on the surface, not by cutting down what rose from the ground, because as long as the source remained, the bones would continue to move, to assemble, to attack, and the larger mass stepped forward again. Its structure more stable now, its movements more precise, and as it did, the skeletons around it aligned perfectly, their spacing exact, their timing synchronized in a way that left no clear opening. And Ronan felt the shift in the fight immediately. This was no longer a series of attacks. This was a coordinated strike directed by something that understood how to control every piece at once, and the ground beneath him trembled again, stronger this time, deeper, as if whatever lay below had moved closer, had positioned itself directly beneath the battlefield. And Ronan Vorn tightened his grip on the blade, because now he knew the truth. The bones were not the threat. They were the hands of something buried below. And until he reached that something, until he broke the will that guided them, this fight would not end, no matter how many he cut down. The formation tightened until there was almost no space left to move, and that was when Ronan understood the shift was complete. This was no longer pressure meant to drive him back. This was control meant to hold him in place. The larger construct advanced at the center of it all. Its structure now fully aligned, the bones no longer shifting loosely, but locked together with deliberate precision, as if whatever guided them had finished shaping it into something stable, something capable of sustained movement. And the smaller skeletons around it moved in perfect sync, their steps matching its pace, their positions adjusting to maintain the same distance from him at all times. And Ronan moved, first, stepping forward instead of back, forcing the distance closed before the pattern could lock completely, his blade cutting through the nearest one in a fast, decisive strike. the bones splitting apart under the force. But even as they fell, the space closed again, another taking its place, as if nothing had been lost, and the larger construct answered immediately, its limbs swinging in a heavy arc that forced him to turn the blow aside, the impact stronger than before, the weight behind it enough to carry through if he had met it directly. And Ronan stepped inside the motion again, his blade driving toward the center of the mass, aiming for the point where the bones had fused most tightly. But the resistance was wrong, not just harder, but held together by something beyond physical structure, something that resisted like pressure, rather than material, and he pulled back before it could trap the blade within the shifting frame. The construct adjusted instantly, its limbs reconfiguring, the bones sliding and locking into new positions to counter his movement, and the skeletons around them closed tighter, their attacks coming in overlapping patterns, one low, one high, one from the side, forcing him to keep moving, to keep cutting, because stopping even for a moment would mean being pinned in place and dragged down. And that was when the ground beneath them changed. Not a ripple, not a rise, but a slow, steady sinking, as if the surface itself had begun to give way. And Ronan felt it immediately, the loss of firmness beneath his feet, the soil loosening as something below shifted its weight, and the realization came cold and immediate. The battlefield itself was part of it. The ground was not just where it moved. It was part of its structure, and it could pull him down into it. Whenever it chose, the larger construct pressed forward again, its movements more aggressive now, less measured, as if it sensed the same thing, as if it knew the moment was approaching where the fight would end, not above ground, but below. And Ronan changed direction sharply, stepping toward it again, closing the distance before it could use the ground against him, his blade cutting through one of its supporting limbs, the bones splitting apart and the structure sagging slightly, before correcting itself, the remaining pieces shifting to take the weight, and that confirmed it. The outer form could be damaged, but it would always compensate as long as the core remained intact. And the core was not here, not in the bones, not in the structure, but beneath it. The ground cracked, then a sharp, uneven split forming between them as the soil gave way, and Ronan stepped back just in time as a section of the surface collapsed inward, revealing a dark, hollow space below. Not a clean tunnel, but a deeper chamber, where the bones extended downward in thick layered clusters, forming something like roots that connected the constructs above to whatever lay beneath. And for a brief moment he saw it clearly. Not a creature in shape, not something that could be described in simple terms, but a mass of bone, packed tightly together, shifting slowly within the earth, the source from which the others were drawn, the place where the structure began. And the realization settled fully. This was not a shepherd of bones. In the way the villagers believed, it was the bones themselves gathered into something larger, something that had learned to move, to direct, to assemble itself into forms that could act above ground, while the true body remained hidden below, and the construct above reacted instantly to the exposure, its movements sharpening its attacks, becoming more direct, as if trying to force him away from the opening to prevent him from reaching the core, and the skeletons around him pressed in harder, their strikes coming faster, their coordination perfect. And Ronan moved through them with increasing urgency, his blade cutting a path not to escape, but to reach that opening. because now he understood there would be no other way to end this. Cutting. The constructs would change nothing. Destroying the core was the only answer, and as the ground continued to shift beneath him, the opening widening slightly, before beginning to close again, Ronan Raven committed fully to the path forward, because if he failed to reach it now, the earth would seal again, and he would be trapped above it, fighting something that could never truly be killed. From where he stood, Ronan did not hesitate as the opening began to close, because hesitation here meant losing the only path to the source, and once the ground sealed again, the fight would return to what it had been. Before endless bodies, endless movement, and no way to end it. So he drove forward, through the narrowing space, his blade cutting through the nearest skeleton. In a tight, controlled strike, the bones splitting apart as he stepped past them, the others closing in. Immediately their movements sharper, more urgent, as if the thing beneath had recognized the threat and was forcing every piece of itself to respond at once. The larger construct lunged to intercept him, its mass shifting to block the opening, its limbs striking in a heavy, overlapping pattern meant to slow him just long enough for the ground to seal, and Ronan stepped into it instead of away, turning his body just enough to let the first strike pass his shoulder, the impact glancing rather than crushing. As he drove forward inside its reach, his blade rising in a short, precise motion that cut through the central frame, not to destroy it, but to disrupt it, to force its structure out of alignment for a fraction of a second, and that was enough. The construct faltered, its weight shifting unevenly as the bones lost their perfect coordination, and Ronan pushed through it, without stopping his boots, hitting the edge of the opening, as the ground continued to close, and then he dropped into it, the darkness swallowing him, as the space above narrowed, the last of the light cutting off as the surface sealed behind him, and the world became confined to the chamber below, the air thick with the dry scent of bone and earth, the walls shifting slowly around him as the structure reacted to his presence, the mass at the center moving more violently now, the bones grinding against each other in a deep, continuous sound that filled the space, and Ronan did not wait for it to form into something larger. He moved, immediately closing the distance across the uneven ground, his footing unstable as the surface shifted beneath him, the bone structures rising and falling in slow waves, as if he walked across something that was alive, and the first shapes broke free from the walls again, skeletons forming as they dropped toward him. But here, there was no space for them to surround him, no room for formation, and he cut through them as they came, each strike clearing a path forward, the pieces falling away and not reforming quickly enough to matter, because the structure itself was focused elsewhere on the core, on protecting what lay at its center. And Ronan reached it. Then, the mass fully visible, now a dense knot of bone packed together, in a form that did not resemble anything that had ever lived. The pieces fused into something new, something that pulsed with a slow, uneven rhythm, as if it were trying to maintain control over everything above and below at once. And he saw the weak point, not a gap, not an opening, but a place where the structure shifted more than the rest, where the alignment was not perfect, where the movement originated, and he stepped onto it, his weight pressing down as the mass reacted violently, the surrounding bones rising in sharp angles to intercept, to pierce, to hold him in place. and he moved before they could close his blade, driving downward with everything he had behind it. The steel striking the core and meeting resistance that pushed back against him. Not like bone, not like flesh, but like pressure held too tightly, and he forced it deeper, twisting hard, driving through that resistance. As the entire chamber convulsed, the walls shifting unevenly, the bones around him losing alignment as the connection faltered, and he held the blade there for a single heartbeat longer before twisting again. And this time, something broke the pulse beneath the surface, collapsing the movement, stuttering as the structure failed from within, and the reaction spread instantly, the bones around him losing coordination, the forms that had begun to rise, collapsing before they could complete the motion, the walls sagging as the support gave way, and Ronan ripped the blade free, stepping back as the chamber began to fall apart, the ground beneath him sinking unevenly as the mass broke into separate pieces, no longer held together by anything that mattered, and he turned, immediately moving toward where the opening had been, climbing through the collapsing structure. As the space shifted around him, the bones falling away into the earth as the tunnels gave out, and when he broke through the surface again, the cemetery above him was already changing, the ground sinking in places, the disturbed graves collapsing inward as the structure beneath them failed, and Ronan rolled clear as the earth settled, the movement slowing, then stopping entirely. The silence that followed complete and empty, the clicking sound gone. The pressure beneath the ground vanished, and he lay there for a moment longer, his breathing steady despite the strain, because he needed to be certain, needed to feel if anything still moved below. But there was nothing, no shifting, no sound, no sign that anything remained. And slowly he rose to his feet, his gaze moving across the burial ground where the soil had begun to settle. The graves no longer disturbed the surface, still as it should have been. And Ronan Vaughan turned away, without looking back, because whatever had gathered the bones of the dead, whatever had shaped them into something that moved and hunted, had been broken at its source. And for now the earth would hold again. The dead would remain where they were laid, and the silence would remain until something else found a way to break it again. Somewhere else where no one was ready to stop it.